The monks had been at it for days, painstakingly using tiny crystals of sand to create a circular mandala, a spiritual rendering of the cosmos. In his book Callings, Greg Lavoie recounts visiting an exhibit of sacred art from Tibet, where a group of monks traveling with the Dalai Lama were creating an elaborate mandala out of colored sand ground up from gemstones. For nearly a month, they had worked silently, bent over the low platform that cradled the growing sacrament. They had laid out their intricate geometry of devotion by hand, surrounded constantly by onlookers who stood sometimes for hours, simply watching, their busy lives uncharacteristically forgotten. As a spectacular lesson on the Buddhist teachings of non-attachment, the monks intended from the very start to dismantle the mandala after a few months on exhibit and to scatter the sand into the sea. On the day before the final ritual celebrating its completion, just as the monks were putting the finishing touches on the mandala, a woman jumped over the velvet ropes, climbed onto the platform, and trampled it with her feet, screaming something about Buddhist death cults. When Lavoie, sitting in his kitchen, read about this attack on the mandala he had witnessed being made, his head filled with images of frontier justice. But his rage turned to disbelief when he read of the monks' response. "We don't feel any negativity," one of them said. "We don't know how to judge her motivations, but we are praying for her to find love and compassion." Lavoie confesses that coming from a long line of avengers, people who had demanded eyes for eyes and teeth for teeth, he had always had a difficult time with forgiveness. He had hung on to certain betrayals all his life, refusing to let go of things that he had long ago lost forever. Still, he was aghast when he learned that the museum was considering pressing charges against the woman. To do so, he thought, would be a dishonor to the monk's gesture of absolution, an act that greatly diffused the situation, drained much of the bitterness from it, and set, he said, a very hard example for everyone else to follow. This morning, I want to mistaken notion that an offender is the only one in need of forgiveness. When we seem to believe a person being forgiven is somehow receiving a gift or a reprieve, if you will, from the one who has been hurt or offended. While this is certainly a part of the equation, I believe that forgiveness is as much and maybe even more about the person doing the forgiving as it is about the one receiving it. Forgiveness, in my book, is about finding the courage of will within us to move towards healing and to free ourselves from the hurts in which our lives and the lives of others have become entangled. This is, to me, the most basic work of the world, because, as Norman Cousins has put it, human life itself is an adventure in forgiveness. And so it is. Yet for all the opportunity we have to practice at it, to hone our skills in this sacred craft, it seems that we have an awful lot left to learn. I know that I do. And that's why I am always looking for teachers, for people who have found within their hearts an uncommon capacity to forgive against all odds in defiance of reason or the desire for revenge, people who remain true only to the uncanny logic of a heart deeply grounded in the ways of compassion. There is, for me, something about forgiveness that says yes, something that is profoundly life-affirming and astonishingly real, something that says this is right, that this is how the world works when it works best. It is that something that I find in the story of the monks. On one hand, it would be easy for us to take their response for granted, given that they're monks and all. I mean, isn't that exactly what you would expect monks to do? But in light of such a powerful story, I can't help but wonder what it would mean if we were to forgive in such a radical manner. I wonder what it would mean when we need it most to be forgiven in that way. And I wonder what our world and our lives within it might look like if such extraordinary acts of forgiveness and compassion were more the rule than the notable exception. These are more than theoretical questions, of course, since on this great human adventure in forgiveness, we, just like those monks, make up our responses from the very stuff of our lives, with our thoughts, our words, and our deeds. It is worth remembering, then, that even at the most painful points in our lives, when filled with anger or righteous rage, we always possess the power to forgive, to decide just how it is that we will respond to having been wronged in some way. Now, I suspect I know what you're thinking, that yes, there is a long line of atrocities in human history that come to mind as being simply unforgivable, that our planet is littered with killing fields from Cambodia to Rwanda, and that for good reason, names like Dachau and Auschwitz will go down in infamy, that Hitler, Pol Pot, and their ilk are people seemingly beyond reach of all redemption. Even still, in all of these circumstances, I still believe that forgiveness is not only possible, but a necessary part of healing the injuries in our lives and the deep wounds of this world. Now, I realize this is a bold thing to say, and I know you may well disagree with me. We need not look to far-flung places or to the extremes of history, but often only to the immediate circle of our lives to find people whom we simply cannot imagine forgiving. For some of us, there are hurts that seem beyond all hope of healing, and people in our lives whose behavior falls far beyond the bounds of forgiveness. And if this is as true as it is true for you as it certainly has been for me, if you can't fathom forgiving someone in your life who has done you great harm, I would simply ask you, how is that stance serving you? And then I'll tell you a story about Hella Ehrlich, who grew up in Nazi Germany and managed to escape the death camps by immigrating to England just before the outbreak of World War II. Even though she escaped, she knew tremendous suffering in her life. Her father, her grandparents, and all of her childhood friends died in the Holocaust. The enormity of her pain led her to a lifelong struggle with bitterness. She was unable and unwilling to forgive. But after wrestling for decades with a hatred for the Nazis, she came to realize that she too possessed the all too human capacity to cause harm. She wrote, "It dawned on me that if I looked into my own heart, I could find the seeds of hatred there too. Arrogant thoughts, feelings of irritation towards others, coldness, anger, envy, even indifference. All these things, the roots of what happened in Nazi Germany. I recognized more clearly than ever before that I myself stood in desperate need of forgiveness. And when I did," she said, "I finally felt completely free." Forgiveness is an exacting journey that begins with our willingness to choose a different response to our experience of suffering some injustice. It involves a deliberate shift away from resentment and revenge, even though and even when we may be completely entitled to those feelings. And it is an intentional decision to give the person who has wronged us not what they might well deserve, but what we alone can provide, the unmerited gifts of forgiveness and compassion that are fitting to people of inherent worth and dignity. Now, let me be clear. Forgiveness is not about glossing over the pain that we feel, nor is it about condoning destructive or abusive behavior. To forgive does not mean to excuse anyone from taking responsibility for their actions or the consequences that they unleash. Instead, it is a willful decision to see the one who has wronged us as being more than a perpetrator, more than a villain, as more than whatever it is that they may have done. And so it is a commitment to strive to become our best and highest self. We convey worth and dignity to others by being worthy and dignified ourselves. The Dalai Lama tells the story of a remarkable conversation he had many years ago with another Tibetan monk who had come to see him after spending 18 years in a Chinese prison. The Dalai Lama, who had last seen him in 1959, says that at the time, labeling the Chinese as our enemies, we could self-righteously condemn them for their brutality and dismiss them as unworthy of further thought or consideration. In meeting with the monk, the Dalai Lama asked him what he felt was the biggest threat or danger for him while he was in prison. The Dalai Lama was amazed by his response. He says, "It was extraordinary and inspiring. I was expecting him to say something else, and instead what he said was that he most feared losing his compassion for the Chinese." Friends, the power is always ours. The choice to decide what to do when we have been wronged, the ability to harness our emotions and order our thoughts, all of that belongs to each of us. And very often, as was the case for those imprisoned monk, it can be the one and only thing that we can control. To be sure, there is much that is not within our control. On our own adventure in forgiveness, we may desire and even deserve an apology, a confession, or a request for forgiveness. Yet very often these things may simply not be possible. There may be no chance of real reconciliation and no way that a broken relationship will ever be restored. But even those obstacles can't take away our ability to forgive and to respond with compassion. Because while reconciling with someone who has wronged us requires their active involvement, forgiveness does not. Forgiveness is about us, about how we choose to frame our feelings and our actions. Admittedly, this is more of a Buddhist Christian approach than what is taught in the Jewish tradition, for example, which requires that one must show remorse and repent in order to be forgiven. The caveat, though, even in Judaism, is that once this has been done, the person who has been wronged is obligated to forgive. While I am a big fan of fessing up and do believe that confession is good for the soul, I am not willing to put my own spiritual and mental health on hold, awaiting apologies that may never come. Which has brought me back time and again to the Buddhist practice of metta, or loving kindness meditation. This practice, which I have shared with you often, is a tool for developing compassion, which involves repeating phrases such as, "May I live in safety," "May I be happy," "May I be healthy," "May I live in peace." You begin by prayerfully uttering these words for yourself. Next, you move to someone, usually an elder, for whom you feel great loving kindness, someone such as a parent or a grandparent or a teacher. The phrases are then offered for a close friend, followed by someone toward whom your feelings are neutral. And then comes the hard part, taking someone towards whom you feel hostility or you don't like at all, and you offer up the words, "May you live in safety. May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you live in peace." This practice ends by directing these phrases towards all living beings. It's not as easy as it may seem. Seeking to cultivate compassion toward those who have wronged us may seem too much to bear at times. It may take a very long time to actually do. And the words may repeatedly get stuck in our throats, but better there than in a hardened heart. There is a reason why these things are called practices. To bear fruit, they must be repeated, their wisdom inculcated in our souls, their truth imprinted upon our hearts. And when that work has been done, like with those monks, it's possible to feel compassion for one's captors, or for those who thoughtlessly damage or destroy in an instant the work of our hands or the labor of our lives. Some have called this cheap forgiveness, but I don't buy it, because the cost of hanging on to bitterness and resentment is just too high a price to pay. While not cheap, forgiveness is something of a bargain, a sacred, life-giving bargain that makes our entangled lives on this little planet possible. For we all, at some point in our lives, may find ourselves in need of forgiveness, in need of compassion when we have done nothing to deserve it. In her poem, Because We Spill Not Only Milk, Nancy Schaefer writes that because we are imperfect and love so deeply, we will never have enough days. We need the gift, she says, of starting over, beginning again, just this constant good, this saving hope. Indeed we do. May it be so. Blessed be.